This is the story of how losing everything became the beginning of a life I never expected to have. I sold my home to save my husband's life. When he recovered, he left me for a woman young enough to be his granddaughter. My own son told me I was being dramatic and needed to move on. And on the coldest night of my life, with only a thin jacket and empty stomach, and $7 left in my pocket, I found a little girl curled up behind a trash bin, soaked in rain and terror. Helping her that night changed the entire direction of my life. If you are listening, stay with me until the end, because what happened after that storm still feels unreal even today. I should not have been outside. I should not have walked down that alley. But every step I took led me to a moment that would flip my world upside down in the most unexpected way. This is not a loud revenge story. It is the quiet kind, the kind that grows from truth, from kindness, and from finally choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else. For most of my life, I believed I understood devotion. I believed that if you loved someone well enough and long enough, they would stand with you through anything. That belief carried me through 41 years of marriage to Howard Foster, a man I met when I was 24, and too young to understand how much of myself I would eventually give away. Howard was my opposite in so many ways. He was charming, confident, and always had a smooth answer ready whenever life threw a problem at us. People liked him. I admired him. I trusted him far more than he ever deserved. When he began losing weight and complaining about fatigue, I thought he simply needed rest. But the day the doctor said the words pancreatic cancer, stage 3, it felt like someone had dropped a stone straight through my chest. Howard's hands shook. Mine reached for his without hesitation. There was no question in my mind. I would fight for him with everything I had. Insurance covered some of the treatment, but the rest fell on us. And by us, I mean me. Howard always said he would handle our finances, but when the bills arrived, the truth became clear. There was nothing saved, nothing prepared, so I did the only thing that made sense. I sold our home. I sold the antique shop I had built from nothing over 3 decades. I let go of every piece of security I had ever created. For 8 long months, I drove Howard to treatments, wiped his forehead when he shook with nausea, learned his medication schedule by heart, and slept sitting up more nights than I can count. The first told myself love required sacrifice, and I was willing to give everything I had. When the doctor finally said remission, Howard cried. I cried. I thought we had made it through the storm together. But happiness was brief. One evening, while I was cooking his favorite chicken soup, he told me he wanted a divorce. He said it calmly, almost casually, as if he were commenting on the weather. I did not understand. Not until he admitted he had fallen in love with a 32-year-old nurse named Tuesday Mitchell, someone who made him feel alive again. I felt my world collapse in on itself. But the hardest blow was not from Howard. It came from my son, Kevin, who told me I needed to accept that his father deserved happiness, even if that happiness did not include me. In a single season, I lost my marriage, my home, my livelihood, and the only family I thought I had left. And for the first time in my life, I had no idea where to go next. Losing my marriage was painful, but losing the life I had built with my own hands was something else entirely. After the divorce papers were signed, I packed what little I had left into 2 worn-out bags. The apartment Howard and I had been renting during his treatment was in his name, so when he told me to leave, I had no legal ground to stay. I spent the first night in a cheap motel, the kind where you check the sheets twice before sitting down. By morning, I counted the cash I had left. It was barely enough for food, let alone rent. My credit had taken a beating from the medical bills, and the antique shop was gone. My former business partners offered sympathy but no solutions. They had already moved on. With nowhere else to go, I walked into a women's shelter on the east side of the city. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as the intake worker asked me questions I never imagined answering. Do you have family to stay with? Do you have income? Do you have a place to return to? My answers were all no. My bunk was a narrow cot squeezed between 2 older women who stared at the ceiling with the same exhausted hopelessness I felt settling deep in my bones. Nights were cold, loud, and restless. Someone was always crying softly. Someone was always awake because the nightmare followed them even when their eyes were open. During the day, I searched for work. At 66, interviewers smiled politely, but their eyes said everything. Too old, too slow, too risky. Each rejection chipped away at the last pieces of confidence I had left. A storm was approaching that week. The local news warned it could knock out power across several neighborhoods. The shelter staff prepared extra blankets and bottled water, urging everyone to stay inside once the wind picked up. But late that afternoon, as thunder rolled overhead, I realized I had forgotten to take my blood pressure medication. I needed food in my stomach before I could take it safely. Dinner at the shelter would not be served for another hour. I reached into my pocket. $7 and some coins. It was all I had left. And so, even as the sky darkened, I stepped back outside into the wind, unaware that the worst night of my life was about to lead me to the moment that saved it. The wind had already begun to howl by the time I stepped outside. It clawed at my jacket and pushed cold rain into my face as if the storm itself wanted to drive me back inside. But I kept walking. The corner store was only 3 blocks away, and I told myself I could make it if I moved fast enough. By the time I reached the store, my hair was soaked and my fingers were numb. I bought the cheapest sandwich I could find and a small carton of milk. The total came to just over $4. I stared at the few remaining bills in my hand and tried not to panic. I needed this food. I needed the medicine. I reminded myself it was not the end of the world, even though it felt close. I stepped back outside, clutching the bag to my chest. The sky cracked open with a bolt of lightning, followed by a roar of thunder that vibrated through my bones. The rain came harder, blurring everything around me. That was when I heard it. A thin, broken sound, a child's crying. I turned toward the noise, squinting through the rain. Behind a cluster of trash bins near the closed restaurant next to the store, I saw a small figure curled up into a tight ball. For a moment I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then I heard the cry again. I ran toward her, my feet splashing in the growing puddles. "Honey," I called out, "are you hurt?" The little girl lifted her head. Her big brown eyes were filled with terror. Her hair was soaked and plastered to her cheeks. Her clothes were torn, muddy, and far too thin for the cold. "I am lost," she whispered, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely speak. "I cannot find my dad." My heart clenched. She could not have been more than 8 years old. She looked so small, so fragile, like a bird caught in a storm. "How long have you been out here?" I asked. She shook her head weakly. "I do not know. Since this morning maybe. Maybe yesterday." The fear in her voice hollowed me out. No child should be alone in weather like this. I knelt in the mud beside her, ignoring the icy water soaking through my pants. "What is your name?" I asked gently. "Ellie," she whispered. "Ellie Whitford." "Well, Ellie," I said, wrapping my coat around her shivering shoulders, "we are getting you somewhere warm right now." She clung to me immediately, as if I was the only stable thing left in her world. As I lifted her up, she buried her face into my neck and whispered the words that would stay with me forever. "Please do not leave me." Carrying Ellie through the storm felt like carrying a trembling little heartbeat against my chest. The rain stung our faces, and the wind pushed so hard I had to lean forward just to stay on my feet. We hurried back to the corner store because it was the only building with lights still on. The clerk, a young man named Luis, looked at us with wide eyes when we stumbled inside. He did not ask for details. He simply pointed toward the small seating area near the back and said, "You two stay here until the worst passes." I found paper towels in the restroom and tried to dry Ellie's hair, rubbing her small hands between mine until the shaking eased. Her clothes were soaked through, and she kept pressing herself against me for warmth. I only had a few dollars left, but I spent them on a cheap children's t-shirt and a pair of socks from the clearance shelf. It was not much, but it was dry. When I helped her change, I could see how exhausted she truly was. Her eyes kept fluttering closed, and she leaned against the wall just to stay upright. I bought a small pack of crackers and a bottle of water, and she ate like she had not seen food in days. As she ate, I asked gently, "Ellie, do you remember your dad's name?" She nodded. "His name is Alexander Whitford." Whitford. I had never heard the name before, but she said it the way children speak of someone larger than life. Ellie's voice dropped to a whisper. "The bad men said they would hurt him if I called the police. So I ran. I hid. I tried to find my way home." My heart twisted. This was not just a lost child. This was a child running from danger. We stayed in that store for as long as Louis would allow us. But when the storm calmed enough to step back outside, I realized we had no safe place to go. I could not take her to the shelter where I was staying. Children were not allowed, and the idea of leaving her alone was unthinkable. So we made a plan out of desperation. We would sleep in a public laundromat for the night, where the lights were bright and the doors stayed open. Then, in the morning, we would figure out what to do. I did not know it then, but those 3 nights would bind Ellie to me in a way that neither of us could ever walk away from. By the 3rd day, Ellie and I had fallen into a fragile routine. We spent the mornings in the laundromat where the hum of the machines made her feel safe. At noon, we went to the corner store so she could eat something small. In the afternoons, when the weather allowed it, we sat in the park where she fed the pigeons crumbs from day-old bread. For a child who had been through so much, Ellie was astonishingly brave. But she startled at every sudden noise and always kept one hand gripping my sleeve. I began to realize she was not just lost, she was being hunted. On the 3rd afternoon, Ellie froze, her small fingers tightened around my wrist. "Marlene," she whispered, "that car was here yesterday." I followed her gaze. A black sedan sat across the street, windows tinted too dark to see through. It had not moved for 20 minutes. I felt a pulse of fear. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" She nodded quickly. "It was there when we left the store yesterday, and at the laundromat this morning." My heart thudded in my chest. I stood up slowly and said, "We are going to walk away calmly, all right. Do not look back." Ellie nodded, clutching my hand. We started walking toward the far end of the park. Halfway down the path, I heard a car door slam. "Marlene, they are coming," Ellie whispered, panic rising in her voice. I looked over my shoulder and saw 2 men in dark suits walking toward us. Not running, not shouting, just moving with steady purpose. "Keep walking," I murmured. But before we reached the exit of the park, a second black car pulled up in front of us, cutting us off. Then a third from the left, another from behind. We were surrounded. I pulled Ellie behind me, my heart pounding in my throat. "Stay back," I shouted, though my voice shook. "I have called the police." One of the men raised his hand slowly. His voice was calm and steady. "Ma'am, my name is Agent Rowan. We are not here to hurt you. We are looking for a child named Ellie Whitford." Ellie pressed her face into my back, trembling. "How do I know you are telling the truth?" I demanded. Agent Rowan glanced at the man in the center of the group. The men parted, and a single vehicle rolled forward. Not just any car, a gleaming, armored SUV that probably cost more than everything I had lost. The door opened, and a tall man stepped out. Dark hair, sharp eyes, a presence that seemed to still the air around him. When he saw Ellie, he broke. "Ellie, baby girl." Ellie peeked out from behind me. "Daddy." She ran to him, and he dropped to his knees, gathering her into his arms with a sound that was half sob, half relief. In that moment, I understood. I had not rescued a lost child. I had been protecting the daughter of a man powerful enough to send an army to find her. The ride to the Whitford estate felt unreal, like I had been dropped into someone else's life. Ellie refused to let go of my hand, so I sat beside her in the back of the armored SUV while her father, Alexander Whitford, sat across from us. He never stopped watching his daughter as if afraid she might disappear again. When the gates opened, I realized I had never seen anything like it. The driveway stretched for what felt like half a mile, lined with old oak trees and manicured gardens. The house itself was less a home and more an elegant estate, built of stone and framed with tall windows glowing in the dusk. Servants and security staff waited at the entrance, but none of them mattered to Ellie. Her small hand stayed wrapped around mine. "Come with me," she whispered. "Please." Alexander noticed. His voice softened. "You can stay until we understand what happened. You are safe here, Marlene. Both of you are." Inside, the warmth was almost overwhelming after days of cold and fear. Ellie was taken upstairs by a doctor and 2 women who appeared to be private nurses. Still, she looked over her shoulder again and again to make sure I had not left. A house manager guided me to a guest suite that was larger than any apartment I had ever lived in. The bathroom alone looked like something from a luxury magazine. Fresh clothes waited on the bed, along with a tray of food that smelled like heaven after days of crackers and vending machine snacks. When I stepped under the steaming water of the shower, the grime and exhaustion of the past week washed off me in layers. By the time I changed into the soft clothes they had provided, I almost felt human again. A quiet knock sounded at the door. It was a staff member telling me that Mr. Whitford wanted to speak with me in his study once I felt ready. Part of me wanted to hide. Another part knew I had to face him. I had cared for his daughter for 3 days. but I was still a stranger in his world. And men with that much power did not invite strangers into their homes without a very specific reason. I took a deep breath and followed the staff member down the long hallway toward the study, unaware that my life was about to change again. The Whitford study looked like something pulled from an old-world library, filled with dark wood, tall shelves, and soft lamplight. Alexander stood near the window when I entered, his arms crossed, his posture controlled but not unkind. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter," he said. "Ellie told me everything she remembered. You protected her when you had nothing left yourself." I shook my head. Anyone would have helped her. He met my eyes for the first time, steady and unflinching. "No, Marlene, not everyone would." He began asking measured questions about where I found her, what she said, what we saw. His voice never rose, but the weight behind his words made it clear he carried a level of responsibility I could barely imagine. Then a knock interrupted us. A security officer opened the door. "Sir, someone is at the front gate, asking for Mrs. Foster." My stomach tightened. "Who?" "An older man. He claims to be her husband." "Howard." I felt the blood drain from my face. I had not seen him since he told me he wanted a divorce. Before I could answer, Alexander said, "Do you want to see him?" I swallowed hard. I need to know why he is here. Minutes later, I stood beside Alexander at the estate's entrance while 2 guards stepped aside to let Howard approach. He looked older, gaunt, desperate. His eyes darted around as if he could not believe where he was. "Marlene," he said breathlessly. "Thank God I found you." I folded my arms. "What are you doing here, Howard?" He tried to reach for my hand, but I stepped back. "I made a mistake, Marlene. The biggest one of my life. Tuesday left me. She took my savings, my accounts, everything. I have nothing left." There it was. Not love, not regret. Need. I almost laughed at how predictable it was. Howard's voice cracked. "We can try again. Come home. We can fix this." "There is no home," I said quietly. "You made sure of that." His face twisted with frustration. "So you are staying here with this rich stranger. You think he cares about you. You think he will keep you." Alexander stepped forward, calm but firm. "That is enough." Howard bristled. "Who do you think you are?" "Someone who does not use people," Alexander replied. "Someone who does not walk away when life gets hard." Howard sneered. "She is old. Why would you want her here?" His words sliced through the air like a blade, but Alexander did not flinch. "Because she risked her life for my daughter," he said. "Because she has more character in one breath than you have shown in years." Howard's face crumbled. And for the first time since the divorce, I felt nothing for him. Not anger, not sadness. Just relief that the man who once defined my world no longer held any space in it. 2 years passed, and sometimes I still caught myself wondering how my life managed to shift so dramatically. I went from sleeping on a narrow cot in a crowded shelter to waking up in a quiet guest suite, where sunlight streamed through tall windows each morning. But the biggest change was not the comfort, it was the purpose. Ellie became the center of my days, not because I was hired to look after her, but because she had woven herself into my heart in a way I never saw coming. She followed me into the kitchen every morning, sat beside me during her tutoring sessions, and reached for my hand whenever she felt unsure. What began as protection slowly became family. Alexander noticed the difference too. He saw how Ellie blossomed when I was near and how she slept through the night again after months of nightmares. One evening, after Ellie had fallen asleep with her head resting on my shoulder, he said, "You gave her back her childhood. I will never forget that." Responsibility grew naturally. Before long, the house manager began leaning on me for decisions. Staff came to me with questions. Ellie asked for my approval on everything from school projects to the color of the bow on her hair. When Alexander offered me a permanent position as director of household affairs, I nearly cried. The salary was far more than I had ever earned in my life. The work felt meaningful, and for the first time since my marriage ended, I felt secure. Ellie began calling me Nana Marlene around her 8th birthday. The first time she said it, she was holding a drawing of the 3 of us standing together under a big sun. I kept that picture framed on my bedside table. Life had not returned to what it used to be. It had become something entirely new, built on respect, trust, and the quiet kind of love that grows slowly but deeply. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit by the window and realize I was no longer surviving. I was living. And more than that, I was finally becoming someone I chose to be, not someone tied to the expectations of a man who never valued me. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Alexander asked me to join him in his study. The request itself was not unusual, but the tone of his voice carried a weight that made my heart beat a little faster. When I stepped inside, he was standing near his desk, holding a thin folder in his hands. His expression was calm, but there was something solemn in the way he looked at me. "Marlene," he began, "I have been thinking about this for a long time." He opened the folder and slid a stack of documents toward me. At first I did not understand what I was looking at. Then my breath caught. They were adoption papers, not for Ellie. For me. "Adult adoption," he said softly. "Ellie has been asking for months if there is a way to make you her real grandmother. I told her family is built by choice, not just blood, and you have been that for her. For both of us." I stared at him, stunned into silence. "There is more," he added, handing me a second document. His will. He had named me as Ellie's guardian if anything ever happened to him. I pressed a hand to my chest. "Why would you trust me with something so important?" "Because you are the one person she runs to," he said, "and because you never turned away from her, even when you had nothing yourself." Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "I never expected this." Alexander smiled gently. "Neither did we. But family has a way of finding you when you least expect it." The day I signed the adoption papers, Ellie squeezed my hand so tightly her fingers trembled. When the judge asked if I agreed to become her legal grandmother, she whispered, "Please say yes, Nana. I want you forever." And in that moment, every piece of my life, the losses, the betrayals, the nights I cried alone in the shelter, all of it made sense. Somehow, the path I thought was breaking me had been guiding me to the family I was meant to have. I walked out of that courthouse not as a discarded wife, not as a woman who had been left behind, but as someone deeply chosen. And I learned something I wish I had understood years earlier. You are never too old to start over. You are never too broken to be loved correctly. And the people who try to diminish you will never determine your worth, only you can do that. If you are listening to this and you have ever felt invisible, I hope my story reminds you that life can turn in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes the greatest blessings come after the hardest storms. And before we end, I want to ask you something simple. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who might need it, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Your voice matters, your story matters. And you never know. Someone